Welcome to the debate. Today, we are stepping away from more abstract theory to look at a conflict that plays out on tabletops, every single week. We're examining a very specific, high-stakes scenario. A dungeon master, let's call him Jeff, is running a campaign. It's set in a dense, hilly forest, and he's got a party of 5 players, all playing random races, who are trying to pull off a heist. They need to steal a pot of gold from a castle that is, of course, guarded by paladins and small dragons. And that right there is a recipe for a total party kill if it's approached the wrong way.
Exactly. So the core question we're debating today is really about the approach. Should Jeff and his players treat this primarily as a collaborative storytelling exercise, where, the rule of cool and narrative drive the action? Or is it a rigorous tactical simulation where the cold, hard math of the player's handbook and monster manual decides everything? I'm the advocate, and I'll be arguing for what I call the narrative architect model, that Dungeons & Dragons is, at its heart, a game of imagination.
And I'm the dissenter. I'll be arguing that without strict adherence to the rules, the procedural stuff like movement penalties, vision, the action economy, the game just loses its integrity. I believe Jeff's primary job is to be a referee, an adjudicator, because if you ignore the mechanics of the heist, well, you're not really playing a game anymore. You're just doing make-believe with dice that don't really matter.
I see why you'd frame it that way, but let me set the scene from my perspective. When you actually look at the source material, at the 3 pillars of adventure, the game is explicitly described as part acting, part storytelling, part social interaction. This heist Jeff is running, let's say it's an Aetherpunk-style adventure, magic and tech blending together. It's not just a grid, it's a story. My position is that Jeff's role is to facilitate a memorable experience. If the party has a diverse group, say, a Tarami human and a halfling rogue, the interesting part isn't their stats, but the cues for building your character's story that those choices provide. That wooded forest isn't just a movement penalty, it's a setting for exploration. If Jeff focuses too much on the math, he just suffocates the whole adventure before it even starts.
I'm sorry, I just can't get behind that. You talk about narrative momentum, but the source material is very, very clear. D&D gives structure to stories to determine consequences. That's the key. Unlike just playing make-believe, the dice make certain outcomes more probable. So my position is that this heist is a mathematical gauntlet. Jeff put this castle in a wooded forest with hilly terrain. That's textbook difficult terrain according to the rules. Moving 1 foot costs 2 feet of speed. If players ignore that for the sake of story, they're just not going to get there in time. And then you have the guards, paladins, and dragons. These aren't just narrative flavor. They're stat blocks. They have immunities, they have high passive perceptions. A young green dragon, which fits the small dragon idea perfectly, is lawful evil, with a specific intelligence score. If the players try to role-play their way past something with blind sight and a poison breath weapon without respecting the mechanics, frankly, they deserve to lose. The game works because the danger is real, and the rules define that danger.
That is a compelling argument for the danger, but I think you're missing the forest for the trees here. Literally. Let's take your first point, the journey through the woods. You see the hilly forest as just a subtraction problem for speed. I see it through the lens of the exploration pillar. The DM describes the environment, the players describe what they do. It's a give and take. What if the party has a druid? We have to look at the woodland stride feature. At second level, a druid can move through non-magical thorns and briars at normal speed. If Jeff is just rigidly applying travel penalties, he's ignoring the very class fantasies that let players get around those rules. A heist implies urgency, right? So a narrative-focused DM uses the force to build tension, describing the gloom, the distant sounds of machinery, not stopping every 5 minutes to calculate if they moved 24 or 18 miles that day.
But the druid's woodland stride, that's a mechanic. That's exactly my point. It's a specific rule that creates an exception. If the party doesn't have a druid or a ranger with the right favored terrain, then they are subject to the penalties. Let's look at the travel pace rules for a second. If this is a heist, they are probably moving at a fast pace to save time. Okay, a fast pace lets them cover 4 miles an hour. Yes, but it imposes a -5 penalty to their passive wisdom perception scores.
Which is a fair trade-off for the narrative urgency, I'd say.
Is it? Is it really? Think about what Jeff has in this forest. Wargs and small dragons like pseudo-dragons. If the party's passive perception drops by 5 because they're in a hurry, they are statistically almost guaranteed to be surprised. The player's handbook is clear. If the monsters are hunting, the DM compares their stealth checks to the party's passive perception. A -5 penalty is catastrophic. So a simple narrative choice, we rush through the woods, results in a mechanical reality where the party gets ambushed, they lose an entire round of combat, and they probably burn critical resources before they even see the castle. You cannot role-play your way out of a surprise round if the math says you never saw it coming.
I'm not totally convinced, because that assumes the players are just passively walking into an ambush. This is where the 3 pillars come back in. Exploration isn't just movement, it's interaction. A savvy player, maybe that halfling rogue, might say, okay, I'm going to scout ahead. Even if the main group is rushing, the game allows for that. And the resources you mentioned, you see them as fuel tanks, but in a heist, they're narrative tools. Getting ambushed by wargs isn't a failure, it's a plot beat. It raises the stakes. Maybe the wizard has to use a precious spell slot on invisibility. That creates a new narrative reality. Okay, we're low on magic now. How do we improvise? And the etherpunk setting, the hilly terrain, you can use that. Rolling rocks down a hill isn't some complex combat maneuver, but the Dungeon Master's Guide encourages improvisation. Jeff can just say, yes, the rock slide knocks the warg prone. That's the system working as intended. Prioritizing creative thinking.
Creativity is fine, but let's talk about the castle itself. You mentioned the Paladin Guards. This is where your whole social interaction argument just hits a hard wall. You seem to think the party can just talk their way past these guys?
I absolutely do. They're champions of justice, not mindless robots.
They are champions of law, and the party are thieves. Let's look at the class features. Divine Sense. A paladin can detect any celestial, fiend, or undead within 60 feet. You said the party is made of random races. What if one of them is a tiefling or a drow? The paladin knows something is up immediately. But even more importantly, paladins get aura of courage. They are immune to fear, so intimidation checks? Useless. You literally cannot scare them. And if things go loud? Fine steed. At 5th level, a paladin calls a warhorse. These mounts share the paladin's saving throws. So now you aren't fighting a guard, you're fighting a highly coordinated, high-save cavalry unit. A simple persuasion check isn't going to work on a fanatic who can literally smell evil on you.
Okay, that's an interesting point, but I'd frame it differently. You're seeing the paladin only as a combat machine. The source material says paladins are on quests and serve moral causes. This is a perfect setup for social interaction. A bard with the College of Eloquence, or even just a high charisma character, could use the paladin's own code against them. We're not here to steal, we're recovering an artifact that's corrupting the lord of this castle. It's a deception check, sure, but it targets their ethos. And the random race thing, you see it as a liability, I see it as an asset. A human can blend in. A rogue can use Thieves' Cant to spot a secret mark on the wall that a paladin would never notice. The heist genre is all about the misfit team. If Jeff just plays the paladins as unthinking radar towers that ping evil and attack, he's playing a video game AI, not a D&D campaign.
He is playing the monster as it is designed. And speaking of design, we have to talk about the elephant or the reptile in the room, the dragons. The prompt says small dragons. In D&D, that likely means a wyvern or maybe even a young green dragon since they live in forests.
A young green dragon would be a very formidable narrative antagonist, yes.
It's a formidable mathematical antagonist. Let's run the numbers. A young green dragon has an armor class of 18. For a typical 4th or 5th level party, hitting an AC 18 consistently is tough. But the real problem is the breath weapon, Poison Breath. That's what, 12d6 damage? On average, it's about 42 points of damage. That is enough to instantly knock out a wizard or a rogue who fails their save. And their senses, blind sight out to 30 feet, dark vision to 120, a +7 to perception, the classic heist tropes of sneaking in the shadows, throwing a rock to distract a guard.
That does not work on a creature with blind sight. It smells you. It feels the air move. If Jeff lets a rogue sneak past the dragon within 30 feet just because it's a cool story, he is throwing the entire stat block in the trash.
Oris, he's leaning into the dragon's nature. You said green dragons. What does the monster manual say about them? They're manipulative. They're schemers, lawful evil. They don't just bite and breathe fire, they bargain. This is the ultimate social encounter. The heist is for a pot of gold. Green dragons love treasure, but they also love power, corruption. I would argue the fight with the dragon shouldn't be combat at all. It should be a negotiation. The party offers the dragon a cut of the gold, maybe some information, in exchange for getting past it. This is where the Aetherpunk setting can help. Maybe they offer it a magical battery from the castle. If Jeff runs this as a pure combat simulation, the party dies to the breath weapon, game over. That is boring. But if he runs it as a narrative encounter, the dragon becomes a complication, a potential ally, or even a new quest giver.
But that negotiation only happens if they survive the first 6 seconds. Which brings me to my last point. Party composition and spellcasting mechanics. You see the random races as flavor, a halfling, a Chandathan human. I see them as mechanical inputs that could completely ruin the heist. Let's say one player rolls a kobold. The book is explicit. Kobolds have sunlight sensitivity. That's disadvantage on attack rolls and sight-based perception checks in direct sunlight. If this heist is during the day, that player is a massive liability.
But they might be inside the castle by then.
Material. Verbal components must be chanted in a forceful voice. You cannot whisper invisibility. If a wizard tries to cast a spell to solve a problem while sneaking, they break stealth immediately, unless they have a very specific feature like subtle spell. If Jeff just ignores that, if he lets the wizard silently cast Mage Hand to lift a key, he's cheating the rogue out of their job. He's making magic way too powerful by ignoring its own rules.
I think you're being a little too rigid on the forceful voice thing. The rules say chanting of mystic words, but the volume can be, modulated for the context. But more importantly, you're dismissing the random race party's greatest strength, the diversity of their options. You mentioned the kobold's weakness, but what about a high elf getting a free wizard cantrip? Minor illusion. That is the ultimate heist tool, creating the sound of footsteps down the hall, an image of a crate to hide behind. Or the halfling's lucky trait, re-rolling a 1 on their crucial check. That is a mechanic, yes, but it's a mechanic that creates story. The halfling trips, but somehow lands silently. That's where mechanics and narrative meet perfectly. And the humans, they get that +1 to all ability scores. In a random party, having that jack of all trades is vital. And tools to solve problems, not from the DM just hitting them with a math book.
But the math book is what makes the solution satisfying. If I use minor illusion, I need to know the investigation DC the guard has to beat to see through it. The player's handbook gives a specific mechanic for that. If Jeff just says, "Oh, it works because it's cool," then I haven't outsmarted the guard. The DM just gave me a pass. And about the kobold, if the player knows they have sunlight sensitivity, they should plan the heist for the night. That is the procedural generator working. The mechanics inform the strategy. We can't go at noon because our kobold will be useless. That is a story beat that comes directly from a penalty. If you ignore the penalty, you lose the whole tactical planning element.
I don't disagree that constraints breed creativity, but there is a line between a constraint and just punishment. If the party is climbing in those hills and you apply difficult terrain and the falling rules, 1d6 damage per 10 feet, one bad roll could instantly kill a low-level character.
Then they should have brought a climber's kit or cast Featherfall.
Or Jeff could describe the slip, the desperate grab for a root, the spike of adrenaline, and allow a strength check to recover. That's the referee making a ruling that serves the flow of the game. This Aetherpunk genre is high octane. It's about style. Stopping the game to calculate if the human has enough movement to stand up after falling 10 feet just breaks the immersion. The rule of cool doesn't mean ignore the rules. It means interpret the rules in favor of what's awesome.
And I say if the rope has hit points, use them. Objects have an AC and HP for a reason. A rope has what? AC 11 and 2 hit points? If the rogue only does 1 damage, the rope doesn't break and the paladin looks up and smites them. That is tension. That is drama. Drama comes from the possibility of real, mechanical failure. If Jeff is only a narrative architect, success can feel inevitable. But if he's a referee, survival is earned. The heist is only a heist if getting caught is a mechanical certainty when you mess up.
And I contend getting caught is only interesting if it leads to a new scene, a chase, a trial, not just a combat where the paladin's horse tramples the gnome because the grid said so.
We're getting to the end of our time, but I think we've laid out the core friction. A heist in a hilly forest against paladins and dragons is, by its very nature, a mathematical gauntlet. My position stands. Success hinges on understanding difficult terrain, managing passive perception, and respecting the raw lethality of a green dragon's poison breath. If Jeff ignores those things, he's not playing D&D. He's just writing fan fiction with his friends.
And I maintain that D&D is not a video game to be solved, but a story generator to be experienced. The 3 pillars exist to create a shared memory. Whether they get the gold or they have to flee through the woods using woodland stride, the value is in that give and take between Jeff and the players. The visuals of the Trami human or the Aethapunk city matter more than the exact movement cost of a hill.
I suppose we can agree that Jeff's job is difficult. He has to be the architect to set the scene, as you'd say.
And he must be the referee to make the danger feel real, as you insist.
Right. The best campaign probably lives in the tension between those two. It's the tension between the halfling's luck, bending the odds, and the dragon's breath weapon enforcing reality.
Exactly. The magic happens when the story pushes against the rules, and the rules push right back.
Just make sure you check for traps. Passive perception of 10 is not going to save you.
And make sure you describe your character's cool leather jacket. It might just inspire the bard.
To our listeners, we encourage you to open your own source books. The Player's Handbook, the Monster Manual. Don't just see them as rule sets, but as toolkits for building your own heists, whether they're Aetherpunk or high fantasy.
And do the math. It saves lives. Thank you for joining the debate.